now I feel like a game show host or something. Hey, everybody. We're about to get underway. Just one little quick note. My friend Julia here. Julia, will you stand up for a quick second?
Hi, everyone.
She is missing the dearest thing in her life, or one of the dearest things in her life. It's a purple notebook. And our guess is one of you Wednesday evening accidentally took her swag bag, and that notebook was in it. Her name, unfortunately, is not on it. If you find now or later that you have her notebook, we will help connect you. Send an email to me, and we will make sure it gets back to Julia. So thank you very, very, very much for that. I also just want to take a quick moment and offer a little bit of gratitude, first to all of you. We did this when we gathered, but I think now, 3 days later, it's even more clear to me what an extraordinary community this is and will be. I also want to just very, very briefly, Mags, are you? Where are you? Okay, come over here real quick. I know you got something to do, but come here. So many of you, if you're part of the Com Network Locals, if you've attended our events, as you're coming to this conference, have probably had a chance to have a chat with or an exchange over email or something with Maggie Sauerhage. Maggie is our community and events manager, and she is leaving. She is going to graduate school in communications at Johns Hopkins University. I just want to make sure that we all give her a little bit of recognition and applause. She's amazing. And one day, she's going to be all of our bosses. Okay, now I've teased you guys almost long enough. I'm going to do it a little bit longer. Darian, will you come up here real quick, please? I told you all that the location of where we're headed next year has been hiding in plain sight this entire time. I know a few of you have stopped and seen our friends at Stanford Social Innovation Review. And on page...
Oh.
Yeah, right there.
Wow.
Okay. It's been in here the whole time, page 7. You want to take a selfie?
I do. Laura, could you bring me that selfie stick that I got?
Darian and Kimberly are really into selfies, so we're going to do the Oscar thing real quickly. You guys get to make like fun faces. And then we're going to tell you where we're going.
Oh, that's awesome.
Act like you're excited, because this is going to be good. This is the before picture, but we're going to pretend it's the after picture, okay?
All right. So, 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Cool.
Thank you. You guys are beautiful. All right. I haven't told you yet. I haven't leaked. Do you guys want to know where we're going? Yeah. Have you dug out your Stanford Social Innovation Review and figured it out yet? No? I'm still not going to tell you. I'm going to show you.
Para suayo mamá queñao. Para suayo mamá queñao. Para suayo mamá queñao.
Miami. This week, next year, we're going to be at the historic Fontainebleau Hotel, which is magnificent. It's right on the beach. One more thing. Check your phones. And if it's not there, it will be in a moment or two. You can register for the conference right now.
Woohoo! Let me move immediately to bring you down off your Miami high by showing you these images. Images of everyday poverty, of refugees and migrants, of street demonstrations against racism, images of injustice, inhumanity, and inequality. Hello, I'm Alfred Ironside of the Ford Foundation, and I want to thank you for sticking around for this closing plenary of ComNet 2016, or as I like to call it, the ultimate plenary. This is going to be the ultimate plenary, but it can only be the ultimate plenary with your help. Doug and I can't do it alone. So I'm going to ask you by a round of applause, are you ready to make this the ultimate plenary? All right. All right. Thank you for that. Inequality. Inequality is the overarching challenge around which the work of the Ford Foundation has recently been reorganized. And I could show you hundreds of images of inequality because no matter where you live or where you work or what you work on, the manifestations of inequality are all around us. We know what they look like. But rather than trying to take on every manifestation of inequality, the Ford Foundation sought to understand what lies beneath all these manifestations. So our 100 program staff around the world spent a year studying the root causes of inequality. And they found 5 consistent themes, 5 common, what we call universal drivers of inequality. And they should look familiar. These should not be a surprise to you. Frankly, they didn't surprise us. These are known root causes of many of the issues that we all work on. But one of them did surprise us, and it was this last one. Come on, last one. There it is. Entrenched cultural narratives that divide people and exclude people. Around the world, we really saw this as one of the 5 key drivers of inequality. And perhaps it should not have surprised us because for years we've been making grants on strategic communications, on message research, on storytelling of all kinds, and film. But until we did this global exercise, we had never, across all our work and around the world, formally recognized that narratives that divide people and hold people back are truly among the core drivers of inequality. And more than that, a driver of inequality that we must actively work to disrupt. And so now we are calling that out explicitly across all our work, and that's huge. And the good news is, in my view, the Ford Foundation is not alone. You know, I know that Charles Blow said earlier today that he doesn't care about narrative change, that he wants policy change, and we understand that. I think we view this as not an either-or, but a both. We need both. And the truth is we need to get a lot better in the social change sector about the first, about narrative change. Because for years, the organizations, 2,000 organizations across the country that Ford has the honor of supporting, they've been telling us that they encounter troubling, dominant narratives that hamper their ability to drive change, policy change and other kinds of change. And over the last 2 years, I think we've all been involved in a growing conversation about the role that narratives play in driving change or in blocking change. And I think, in fact, we are on the cusp of a breakthrough moment, a tipping point, if you will, a point at which we may actually start to work together with each other on common narratives that support the common good. So in this ultimate plenary, Doug Hattaway and I will share insights from research we've been doing over the past couple of years to better understand how to connect with Americans today using narrative. We believe that this research will point us toward a fresh way of talking about America's future, one that resonates with people, and I think more importantly, one that transcends political divides rather than feeding off of them. And we'll talk to you about this. Speaking for my own organization, the Ford Foundation, far too much of the communications that we've been involved with in recent years has started with what we want to communicate, or what the organizations we support want to communicate, or think they ought to communicate, or think people need to hear. And we want to change that with this undertaking. Because to our way of thinking, we'll be in a much better position to craft and draw on resonant narratives if we first have a deeper insight into what Americans today truly want for themselves and for the country, and how we can connect those insights to our causes. We're not talking about polls and issue-based surveys here. We're talking about deep research into these entrenched cultural narratives and deep research into identity and aspiration in America today. And so we call this work American Aspirations. Doug is going to walk you through what we've learned. Are you ready for that? Let me hear it again. Yes. All right. So Doug Hattaway, take it away.
Thanks, Alfred Ironside. We're actually going to do like, I'm calling it the Ted and Phil show. I'm going to do like TED Talk up here. He's going to be Phil Donahue and engage you with questions from the audience. By show of hands, who grew up with Phil Donahue? Okay, for you youngsters, he came before Jerry Springer. You'll see what we mean. So Ford's grantees said that there's an entrenched narrative about America that gets in the way of the change they want to drive. But what is a narrative in this sense? This is a buzzword along with storytelling, and those are often used interchangeably. But in this context, they mean different things. A cultural narrative that shapes people's worldview is a set of ideas that frame our perception of the way things are, and they shape our judgments about the way things should be. That's called a meta-narrative. In this context, meta means about. It's the story about the stories that we tell and that we hear. So a story is about a particular person or protagonist in a particular setting and situation. And we're hardwired to listen to a story when it's set up like that. And when we hear a story, we make judgments about the people, about the situation, and we draw on ideas that we hold in our heads. And they provide the moral of the story, the lesson. It's lessons about how the world works and how the world should be. So if we want our stories, our storytelling to win hearts and minds, they need to have a moral or a lesson. We need to be strategic and intentional about the ideas they communicate. We need a narrative framework to help shape and guide our storytelling to drive meaningful narratives. The political debate raging now, if you think about it, is a battle of narratives about what kind of country this is and what kind of country it should be. And our partners in American Aspirations really hope to transcend those divides, as Alfred said, and drive a new narrative about America that can drive change by steering us to common ground so that we can really start working for the common good. So today we're going to draw on American Aspirations research and also some communication science to give you ideas for driving change by driving new narratives about the causes you care about. Let's start looking at that. Here's one powerful idea in the narrative about America, the rugged individual. Technically, that's the Marlboro Man. But he symbolizes a big American idea of the self-made man, right? The value of self-reliance. So when this idea is dominant in our discourse, when it's the only kind of story people hear, more people are more inclined to believe that's how the country works, right? Individuals pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, and they're more likely to believe that's the way it should be. Ford's grantees felt like this is one of those ideas that makes it harder to advocate for social programs and policies where we come together to address inequality in society. Science says that you can't rebut a narrative that's operative in somebody's head just by presenting them with facts and figures. We actively resist information and ideas that don't confirm our own worldview. We all do that. It's called confirmation bias. So you can't talk someone out of a meaningful meta-narrative. You can either activate another one they already have in their head, and we will often hold multiple narratives about the same topic, or you can create a new one that gives them a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at the world. Here's an alternative to the idea of the self-made man, another very traditional American image. This lesson is different. Americans don't just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We work together. Stories like these teach lessons about the importance of community and social responsibility. That idea is also part of the American narrative that most people hold in their heads. We often hold more than one in our heads, as I said, if we've heard more than one. So if you want people in a frame of mind to value social responsibility, support social policies and programs, they need to hear stories about America that show people living by ideals like these. Let's look at a more contemporary example. When young people hear time and again about the individual entrepreneur who had a disruptive idea and made billions of dollars, Steve Jobs, you get lots of people pursuing that version of the American dream. You can also tell the story of all the people who worked together to make Apple the powerhouse it is and learn the power of working as a team. You can tell the story of the teachers who educated the people on that team. That's Steve Jobs and some of his teachers. You could even talk about the taxpayers who helped pay for the schools and pay the teachers' salaries. Now, isn't that a more complete narrative about how opportunity actually works in America? So we need to be strategic about the stories we tell. We need to know what ideas create positive mindsets and motivate people. There's a lot of science that goes into communicating effectively. One is the science of motivation. Motivational science says that our hopes for our lives are powerful drivers of attitudes and behaviors. So if you can connect your cause to people's aspirations for their lives, for the kind of person they want to be, for the kind of community and country they want to live in, you can communicate with maximum motivating power. And that's really what American Aspirations is all about. So one reason both of these narratives are powerful is because they appeal to very common aspirations. We learned from our American Aspirations this. Most people want to be self-reliant. 80% of Americans say they want to live in a country where people take responsibility for themselves. We also think this. We want to feel like we're part of a team. 74%, statistically, just about the same number, say they want to live in a country where people look out for others. Let's see what else American Aspirations found out about people's hopes and values. The idea is to give you insights like this that you can connect your cause to and appeal to what really motivates people. So we talk with people from all walks of life, all over the country, in in-depth individual interviews, and we surveyed over 2,000 people representing the full diversity of the US population. And we asked 3 types of questions. What kind of person do you want to be? That's about your personal identity. What are your hopes for your life? What are you striving and working toward? And what kind of country do you want to live in? Those 3 types of questions. And you might be surprised how much common ground we find when we step back from that political debate that dominates discussions about America and simply ask people about their lives, their hopes for their lives and for their country. And we found time and again, working on all sorts of issues in this country and other countries, when we frame narratives about any topic in terms of shared aspirations, we start the conversation on common ground. We can engage more people in working for the common good. So we're going to tell 3 stories about driving change by driving new narratives on tough social issues. I'll tell the first one and then we'll open it up and ask some questions before we go on to the next one. Each starts with finding the common ground of shared aspirations to create a new narrative and shape a new storytelling strategy to change hearts and minds. And we'll look at American Aspirations research in each of these and also talk about some communication science. Here's the first one. Here's President Obama, 2008, articulating a big idea in the dominant narrative about the topic of marriage. It's between a man and a woman. So that idea and that message, repeated time and again, stood in the way of marriage equality for same-sex couples. My team worked with the movement trying to get marriage equality. Here's a gorgeous symbol symbolizing the success of a new narrative, right? This new narrative drove a different idea, that marriage is a commitment between 2 people. How did that happen? The LGBT movement's narrative about marriage equality was initially framed in terms of rights. Marriage is a civil right under the law. You get a license from the government. And the Constitution says everyone should have equal rights, so it's wrong that 2 men or 2 women who want to get married can't do it, aren't allowed to do it is wrong. That's a rights-based narrative. And to bring that rights-based narrative to life, the LGBT movement told stories showing couples as victims of discrimination. Now, all that's true, right? That is true. From a civil rights point of view, that's the narrative. But most people don't think of marriage in terms of civil rights. Think about it. When it comes to the topic of marriage, if it's something you're interested in, what's your aspiration? We asked people that question. And most people said their aspiration for their marriage was that it be a lifelong commitment, preferably to someone you love, but that's the aspiration. And it can be hard. And we know half of marriages don't even make it, right? But that's the aspiration. When I think of marriage, that's what I'm hoping for. That's what we're talking about here. So what we did was took that insight to drive a new narrative that started off on that common ground, that shared aspiration. And our storytelling focused on couples who made that commitment and stuck together through thick and thin. This is one of the first examples of that storytelling strategy. It's from Massachusetts, the first state to allow same-sex couples to marry. Now, this story is about two women who committed to each other and stayed together after one got cancer, and the one on the right's in a wheelchair because of her cancer. Their story reflects the aspirations of the audience. The audience, in this case, where people are actually going to vote on this issue. Because of those shared aspirations, people could relate to the relationship. They could see, they could respect the commitment that they saw. It took years and many losses at the ballot box for the movement to actually get to adopt the storytelling strategy and drive a common narrative together all across the country. But driving that new narrative did help to drive social change in America. So let's talk about what we found in American Aspirations research about what people what kind of person people want to be. I'm going to ask you for a show of hands on this topic. We actually sent out some questions on that awesome ComNet app. Congratulations, ComNet, on the app, by the way. It was very helpful this year. And we sent out a few questions, which a number of you answered, asking you, how do you think people rank different personal traits that they value? So let's focus on two of those. We asked people about over a dozen personal traits, what kind of person you want to be, that we had derived from our interviews with people and also drawing from several schools of thought and motivational psychology. Let's focus on two of them and see a show of hands between wanting to be a responsible person or wanting to be a strong person. So think about the American public. How many people would think more people would say, I want to be responsible? And how many folks would think, I want to be strong? Most of you think most people would say, I want to be a strong person. On the app survey reflected what you just said. 55% predicted that Americans would say strong, 27% said responsible. Let's see what we found in American Aspirations. Number one personal trait goal people have is to be a responsible person. What we asked them here was rate on a scale of 1 to 10 personal traits. Like these ones people marked as 10, and they could mark as many as they want. So what you see there, and of course, strong is in there. Look, it's just at 53%. That doesn't mean that's important. Over half of the population said, yeah, they rated 10 out of 10, I want to be strong, of course. And it's not to say that these are necessarily on a hierarchy. This is to give you food for thought about how you might connect your cause to the way people aspire to see themselves in their lives. So when you look at this, top responses here are responsible, loyal, family-oriented. The story of a couple's commitment speaks to those three values, right? Responsible, they made a commitment, a lifelong one. Loyal to each other, being family-oriented. So when people see traits they value reflected in others like this, as in this story, we've reduced what social psychologists call social distance between groups. We've found common ground. That's really a big idea that we're after here. So lesson number one, and then we're going to take some questions. Phil, you got the microphone?
I'm here, don't worry.
Put people in the picture with positive personal traits that encourage empathy and respect and help close social distance between people.
So we're going to ask you if you have any questions at this point, what's percolating, if you have any clarifying questions. But I want to start, Doug, by talk to me about what does it mean, positive personal traits? Describe that a little more in depth.
It's interesting how powerful personal identity is in motivating our behavior. We really do try to live up to our ideals. We have a picture in our head of what kind of person we want to be, and we really do on our best days, and we often feel disappointed when we don't live up to that ideal of what we want to be. There's a really interesting, powerful experiment done around voting to figure out how to get people to vote. And personal identity was the more powerful way to get people to vote. Most people do not believe, and it's kind of rational, that their vote doesn't count. Literally, like, my one little vote doesn't count. It's hard to, like, explain how it does. what was more powerful in literally getting more people to vote, and this was a behavioral study, so how many people turned out and vote, was appealing to personal identity. Responsible people vote, right? I want to be a responsible person. I'm going to vote. See how the personal identity, that is what drove more people to actually get off their butt and go vote, not trying to explain how it works. See that? Appeals to personal identity are super powerful. That's why we wanted to look at personal traits. What kind of person do people see themselves as? Or more importantly, even, what are they aspiring to do? What kind of person are they trying to be?
So questions at this point. Anything you want to clarify? Yes, back here. Be very brief, please.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. Just a brief comment. I think you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back. And when I heard you say that you're looking for narratives that transcend the political divide, a red flag went up, because my own sense is that we're living in a country where a big part of the leadership is frankly trying to burn the house down. And yes, it's important to displace bad narratives with positive narratives, but if you're also not working at the same time to discredit the falsehoods that are constantly being deployed in reaction to what you're trying to do, I think so. Is your work gonna kind of be fighting with both hands or just one?
Speak to that, Doug, because this is a classic question.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, you absolutely do have to combat falsehoods. What the science says is you're not going to talk people out of an operative narrative that is an important worldview to them, and sometimes that's the difference between focusing on trying to change the mind of the opposition, if you will, to put it in political terms, versus to try to persuade the majority and look for folks who aren't driven and sort of form their own worldview and self-concept around a powerful narrative like that. You have to work on multiple fronts. And one place where I think the way to think about it, like you're saying, you have to combat lies. Absolutely. You tell the truth, right? I think the science saying that statistics don't beat a narrative doesn't say, well, don't use them. You're going to have more motivating power if you use stories and statistics. Stories about people that illustrate truths and facts. It's the combination, I think, that gives you the most firepower. And we have to fight against those all the time, absolutely. I think that is a big part of what this is trying to do. I think one thing, if we get caught up, remember, because the political conversation is this binary one. And sure, you have to engage in that, certainly. But one of the aspirations of folks partnering here is that in many realms, we can step out of the political partisan debate and bring people together around shared goals and aspirations where we can actually disrupt that political debate. I think that's part of the hope.
Any other quick questions, clarifying questions at this moment before we move on with the next lesson? Anything about this particular? Okay, keep going.
There's one in the back there.
Oh, there was. I missed it. Sorry, yeah.
This is great stuff, Doug. I was just wondering, like, how you get a sense of how often you're going to have to refresh this research. Like, how much is this like bedrock, and how much of this is today?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's something that would need to be refreshed constantly, and this, by the way, is the first cut at this stuff. As you'll notice, this is a list of words that aren't defined. That's the next phase here. I think, and the question, if you're really looking at what are sort of those fundamental aspirations that drive people, I don't know how much those are going to change given the context. It's different from asking like a question about a topical issue that's in the news that people don't have lots of thoughts and opinions about, and those are very malleable and shapeable based on what happened last week. What I'm hoping for my life probably doesn't change as often as my opinion about something like that. But yeah, I think it is something that we should continue to build a real body of knowledge around that we can all draw from in our work. And I'll tell you about the next phase we're going through with this.
Yeah, that's exactly our plan, in fact. Let's keep going.
Let's look at another example of driving a new narrative to drive change. Here's Paul Ryan talking about people in poverty. Particular men not working, generations not even thinking about working. Now, not that I'm picking on politicians here, but they do drive the political narrative, certainly, about the country. And they're often arguing about what this country means. So there's him talking about that topic. Here he is having a bit of a change of heart. Now that's the kind of change we were after in working with a group of Ford grantees, dozens of them, and driving a new narrative about the government's anti-poverty programs, commonly known as welfare. This is an image from a message manual used by dozens of Ford grantees, as well as leaders in government, academia, and media who came together and said, let's drive a new narrative together. They all wanted to drive a narrative with the goal of increasing public support for government programs that help people get out of poverty and achieve financial security. So to help figure out the big ideas that would motivate people, we tested stories. And that's one way you can get to, well, what are the big ideas? Well, look at the individual stories and what do you see there? We've done a number of projects where we started there. And we tested a number that drove different ideas. One common one showed people in poverty as victims of circumstance, and the goal was to try to get people to feel sorry for them, and that's a very common approach in the field. That didn't work as well as stories showing people taking initiative to overcome their circumstances. And that's called an assets-oriented versus a deficits-oriented narrative. So I'll give you an example of one David story. We tested stories about a man named David, which started about describing his circumstances, and showed what he was doing about it. He worked hard, he took classes, opened a bank account, saved money. This is all referring to literally programs that are available for people in poverty, or that we wanted to be available. Here's a quote from a participant in the research expressing something. The insight there, the idea was he's taking initiative, he's doing things. And it was really interesting to see how people went from, it sort of turned the tables on that stereotype that you saw from Paul Ryan, to actually hear actual stories of real people doing things. The truth is, in America, to be in poverty, you probably have a job or two. You probably work really hard and they don't pay enough, you know? So that was really the insight that we used to develop a new storytelling strategy here. And it's a story communicating positive personal traits. He's hardworking, he's responsible, family-oriented. Most people can relate to that. Now look at the last sentence. This was all about realizing his dream of owning a home and creating a better life for his children. Now, having a job that pays enough to own a home and provide an education for kids, those are concrete ways that people define what's an abstract aspiration, financial security. And that's a lesson we're going to talk about in a second about how do you communicate about goals effectively. So let's talk about this second basket of questions. What do you want for your life? We asked people that. We posed that to you all in the survey. Let's focus on two of those. Having a purpose in life, a sense of purpose, versus having financial security. So thinking about Americans, would you guess that more people said, I want a sense of purpose in life? Who would think that? And how many would think, well, more people would say, I want financial security, rate that higher. Can't see as well in here. On our app, 72% of ComNet respondees thought that would be the sense of purpose would rate higher, and 23% said financial security. Let's see what Americans told us. Having a purpose in life was the #1 personal goal, rated 10 out of 10. Look at this, enjoying life every day, respecting people who are different. Are these like values you can work with to try to connect with people? If you know about schools of thought, motivational psychology, and one school of thought from a guy named Maslow talks about a hierarchy of needs, says that we're first motivated to meet our basic needs for food, shelter, survival. And when we have those, we want a sense of security, i.e. we're not worrying about them. You see financial security there. And then when you have that, you want achievement in your life, and you want esteem and recognition and respect. And you also want to give it to others. But ultimately, they say, when you have that, when you're safe and secure, and you feel like you're doing good work, and you're respected and for it, the ultimate you're after is a sense of purpose in your life. They call it self-actualization. So you actually almost can predict that sort of hierarchy showing up. But again, we're looking for lots of ideas here where something you're working on can connect to what people really want in their life. And you can think about ways to connect your cause to it. Having financial security, of course, was #4. So when you have a narrative framework with ideas that motivate people like that, like we had in that, you can spin out messages. So we're thinking, what are the ideas in our narrative framework? And then we can spin out messages on different topics or tailored to different audiences that draw from that toolkit of ideas. Here's a specific message based on our narrative about anti-poverty programs. It's about middle-class Americans being the engine of our economy. And what it says is government should offer tools that help people buy a home, start a business so they can achieve financial security. That convinced 7 out of 10 people to support government programs that help people out of poverty. Just to tell you a little bit, we're showing that to show you a little bit of the techniques in the communication science. So we know financial security is an aspiration, but it's also an abstraction. How do you picture financial security? The bolded words define it in concrete ways. Home, start a business. That's vivid language. You can picture a home, you can picture a business. So part of the science behind communicating about goals is that people are more motivated to work to achieve a goal they can actually see in their mind's eye. That's why your images, your stories that show pictures, and using words that evoke images in the brain, that's what a vision statement should do for you. It should literally evoke images in the brain. People will be more motivated to achieve it if they can see it. So here, for example, we replace the word programs with tools. A tool is a metaphor for empowerment. And physical metaphors are another powerful tool to use in your language because they fire up different parts of the brain. Beyond the language center and the visual center, even the motor sensors in your brain. If you show physical movement, physical objects in your language, it starts to fire up more of the brain and get people's whole brain involved. That's more powerful communication. So here's President Obama, who was using this language along with dozens of federal agencies and advocacy organizations trying to drive that new narrative together. So this story we talked about here, David's story, spoke to personal traits, like that first bucket of responsibility and hardworking, and then his personal goals. So now we're connecting on a couple aspirational levels. So our lesson number 2 out of this is to articulate goals people can relate to. I share that goal, but also they can visualize. I can see it. Those are 2 ways that you can frame whatever you're working on, frame your goal that way, and you're more likely to connect with people with more motivating power. Turn it over to Alfred.
Okay, any questions at this point? Clarifying questions. Is there a skeptic in the room? Someone who's not quite on board? Are you with us? Is this making sense? Yes, right here. Hi there.
Hi, I'm going to perhaps play the skeptic here just a little bit.
Sure.
It strikes me as we're presenting this, your target audience is who are we trying to convince that these people are respectable and responsible, and
Yep.
what's the onus there?
Right. Yep.
Who needs to prove that to the other?
Right. In this case, in the first one, it was people who were voting on the topic of marriage. Our clients didn't think people should be voting on civil rights, but in fact they were. So that was voters, writ large, who are mostly not same-sex couples. And the other one, it was taxpayers, and actually it was the focus groups, and you saw the quotes from the focus group. That was moderate taxpayers, I think you would describe them. There was diverse representation of people, but it was people who didn't identify themselves as either super liberal or super conservative. How do we sort of get to the middle? That was the audience for that. That's a good question. And everything starts, as we all know, strategic communication starts with what's the goal? We needed to win some ballot measures, and we needed to drive up public support for government programs, and who is the audience that can help you achieve that goal? And then how do we connect to their aspirations?
And I'll
That's
say
a very
on this,
Yep.
these organizations that Ford works with on these issues are economic justice organizations, right? And they really struggled. Their messages were falling short, and we showed them the focus groups where they saw it. They didn't want to change their message, right? And so it took some time. It took some real investment, up to a year, working with these organizations to have them see that what they were doing wasn't working and that they had to connect to people differently. When they saw this research, they really started to adopt it. But they're coming from the place that your question comes from, too. Yeah.
Yep, trying to reduce social distance was part of the strategy. They wanted to help build public support. Another story.
But I guess I just want to say one more thing about that. Because, again, embedded in your question, this is not an us and them narrative here. This is all of us, right? We, as Americans, value hard work. That's one of those ideas about America that most people hold. So tapping into that drives people in a positive direction. Sorry. Any other questions? Yes.
Phil Donahue's looking pretty sprightly today.
Hey, this is, what? What? Okay. This is a really interesting, quick question. The story, particularly the story about David, and all these stories still have to do with the individual being self-reliant on some level, and the government or the supportive agencies providing the tools or the jump start that that person needs to provide for his or her family or to lift himself out of poverty. And I'm not seeing the barn raising piece up here. I'm seeing more the Marlboro Man, and I'm wondering if that's
Right.
just so strongly ingrained that we all need to work with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because where these stories go to was the government program is something we all build and provide together. If you think about these safety net tools, we actually tested some language about this recently. It's a really good question. Most people don't intuitively connect themselves to that, don't realize that their tax dollars have built a safety net that's available to all of us. And we all built it together. And it's there for any one of us. I think that's one of the I don't know, I guess a misframing about sort of poverty issues and the safety net, those programs, they're there for everybody if you fall into poverty. That's not just there for a few people. And more people have had to take advantage of them over the past 10 years. So there's more understanding of that. So that's exactly right. That story is supposed to show how an individual benefits, but from tools that have been provided by all of us and are there for all of us. I think that's one of the insights. If I had this, I would show you how I think it was 7 to 8 out of 10 people when you frame these programs that way. And I'm talking our safety net includes Social Security, Medicare, which we know are usually called middle class programs, and they have very broad public support, versus low income programs, which don't. But they're the same thing. We put in our tax dollars to provide those for everybody. That's the barn raising piece of it. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the kind of story we need to tell, because it's amazing how people, the infrastructure that we all built together that make opportunity and security possible in this society are absolutely invisible to people. It's unbelievable. And yet it's all around us. I think one of the most spontaneous ways people, intuitive ways people connect themselves to that is as a taxpayer, right? But it's always like, oh God, I got to pay my taxes, right? Not a positive frame, or that's a contribution I've made to create opportunity in this country. That's a new narrative that we should try to drive.
And we'll be working in that direction as we continue to do the research. Any other quick questions at this juncture? We want to keep moving. Let's keep moving, Doug.
So here's another example. I can't believe, I'm so sick of talking about Donald Trump, but it's a worthy example. Here he is trying to drive a narrative that American Muslims can't be trusted. You probably heard this one, right? He said Muslims in America cheered when the Twin Towers fell on 9/11, right? You might have seen this one too. Father of a young American Muslim driving a very different narrative. Stories like the Khan's family tell the truth. And we were talking about how do you have to counter lies. You counter lies with the truth. Stories that tell the truth are more powerful than statistics or facts. Putting them together is going to drive the greatest motivating power. Here's an ad driving that narrative that we had worked with a group of organizations that are trying to counter this kind of vitriol in American society. And here's what a member of the target audience said about this kind of narrative. And that was the goal. That was the goal of the organizations, which is to try to counter prejudice. So so this story provides a powerful alternative to that other kind of narrative that you see drawn, being driven in our politics. And this kind of narrative is meant to drive change by steering conversation to the common ground of shared aspirations about who we want to be, what we want for our lives, and what kind of country we want. And that was the third realm that we asked for people's aspirations. What kind of country do you want to live in? Because we're trying to, what Ford wants to do is connect your personal aspirations to the social good and your sense of social responsibility. So what do you think about all of that? So I'll put that back to you guys, asking about goals for the country. Again, we asked over a dozen, but focusing on two in terms of having a country that encourages cooperation and compromise versus a country that protects individual rights and freedoms. It's not that these are either ors, but just sort of playing the game of ranking them. So how many, by show of hands, would expect, well, more Americans would say, yeah, I want my country to encourage cooperation and compromise versus protect individual rights and freedoms? Yep. You guys were the opposite of the respondents on the survey on the app. So on the app, 62% of ComNetters thought most Americans would say cooperation and compromise. And 29% said protecting individual rights and freedoms. And if those don't add up, because math isn't my strength, it's because there were other choices as well. Let's see what American Aspirations found. Protecting individual rights and freedoms was number one. And ensuring fair treatment for all, right there at the top. Stories like the Khan's family help drive us toward these shared aspirations for the country. That's, again, what it's all about. This narrative speaks at multiple aspirational levels. So people can see in this sort of narrative loyalty. I try to be loyal. I respect that in someone else. Even someone who looks different from me, I see the common humanity there. 70% respecting people who are different. They're saying, I want to respect people who are different. Giving them narratives and showing that helps them live up to that aspiration. Does that make sense? This too, this is trying to drive to fairness in our country. That's, again, it's helping people, it's reminding them of the aspiration they hold. And that is, I think, an important thing. What we're showing here in these poll numbers, it's not making things up, it's stuff people already have in their head. Our stories, our narratives draw them out. So lesson number 3 here is to reach common ground. Whoops, show how you're, don't push the buttons too early. I'm trying. There we go. Push the button once and you'll see a powerful lesson. To reach common ground, show how your cause contributes to the common good. Lots of times we get caught up and it's smart, right? We're used to selling people things and say, support this and you'll get something out of it. My team works with Democratic candidates and they're often doing that. Vote for us and you'll get something. That's a transactional frame. And that puts people in a transactional mindset. There's some great qualitative research by our friends at Topos, who we were just talking about with Meg Bostrom earlier. That puts people in a consumer mindset, where if you talk about government programs as serving the common good, not that language per se, but the idea it's for everybody, that puts them in another frame of mind. You're more likely to get people to support it when you talk about serving the common good. I think back to maximum motivating power, do both things. Show how your work empowers people that you serve, but also how does it benefit everybody? If you can do that, you're really on common ground where people are more likely to recognize the common good and want to help you achieve it. So we're about to travel across the country to learn more about this. We're exploring how to communicate about big ideas that speak to people's aspirations for the country and for their own lives. Big ideas like these. But here's the thing. You look at those are a bunch of buzzwords. These are some of the most, well, freedom, responsibility, opportunity is probably one of the biggest buzzwords in politics. And by buzzword, I mean it's something people say but don't really define. And the lesson about language is that you need to define important words in your own terms. If you just stop at the buzzword, you're at the mercy of what happens in the head of your audience. When you give somebody a word, a chain of associations happens, chain of ideas. Those are called associations. If you don't define it, you're at the mercy of whatever it activated for them. It might have been the last time somebody said that word, what that person told them, or something. You have to take important words like this and give it your own definition that works in support of your cause and your goals. Don't rely on buzzwords. So what we're doing is trying to find meaningful language because these are ideas that we understand people want for the country. I was amazed, and I think you'd be heartened to see that last one, Unity, we did for another project, asked people to draw pictures. What does America look like to you right now, just in your mind's eye, in focus groups all over the country? Like to a person, it was images of division. And different themes about division. People on one side of the tracks or the other, have versus have-nots, but also just fighting and division. That was such a dominant idea. And the pictures they wanted to see was more equality, more level playing field, and more unity in the country. There really is despite the vitriol of the partisan political fight, a lot of Americans, and in that work, it was 8 to 9 out of 10, were really responding to messages of unity. People are wanting common ground. So we're going to look for language, stories, and ideas to help communicate what are really abstract ideas like that. And if I've learned one thing from American Aspirations so far, it's that we Americans from all different walks of life, we really do share so many aspirations. We want to do well for ourselves, and we want to do our part for the common good. We want to be respected, and we want to respect others. We want a life with purpose. And we also want to live in a country that enables us to achieve whatever that means to us as individuals. I think that's the big lesson that I've been learning so far. And a narrative with ideas like that can really drive change by driving us to common ground. Phil, that's the hand.
So, thank you, Doug.
Thanks.
We're at time. There's only so much you can do in 40 minutes. I fought to get this plenary because I think there's a lot that we can all learn from this and that we're learning we want to share. But we really have just, I think, begun to lift the veil on everything that we're taking in. And we want you to continue to learn. So we are going to make this a joint venture going forward. And I'm going to encourage you to visit this website that we have created.
Yep,
push forward one more time. These are all the people we're talking to across the country, their actual faces. AmericanAspirations.com. You can sign up there for regular updates that we'll be putting out about what we're learning in real time. We'll be making invitations for you to watch live the focus groups that are our next round of research. Doug said that we want to give meaning to some of these buzzwords around unity and opportunity. We'll be exploring that with people in the next round of focus groups that are scheduled for just before and also after the upcoming election, so that we're straddling this critical moment in time. And then we'll be doing another round of broad national research to really try and pull all of what we're learning together into the kind of narratives that can be applied in your work. So please visit, please sign up for the updates, please stay in touch, give us your thoughts, your reflections on what we've shared. At the back of the room as you go out, folks are going to hand you a little toolkit based on what you've seen today. We're really, again, in 40 minutes we could only just give you the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we're learning and we want to share. So we look forward to engaging with you and building this work together as we move forward. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, that was awesome. Thank you, sir. One final thing. Thank you. We are adjourned. We'll see you next year in Miami.
This will be everlasting love. This will be the one I've waited